Hello, everyone. Hi, I am here with Dr. Dawn-Elise Snipes, and happy Friday. We have a lot that I want to talk about today, so not sure how much we'll get to, but we will see where the time takes us. But yeah, I want to introduce Dr. Dawn-Elise Snipes. Doc Snipes, a lot of people call you, right? I love
Yes.
that. I was like, Doc Snipes. So we haven't officially met in person, but one day, hopefully soon. We Years and years ago, I would watch her on YouTube. She has in my video description, I have links for her website, for her YouTube. She has lots of different types of YouTube videos. I even posted on there about trauma bonding, everything. And she also not counsels counselors, but teaches counselors, trains them, and therapists. So I would watch her over the years, and she has these informative videos, so many. And I was like a fangirl. Is that what you call them? Like fangirls? And someone one day, we were talking about you because I said, oh, I was just watching your video or whatever. And they said, oh, I know her. And so they introduced us and we started talking. And you guys, she has helped me so much through the past, how many months? Like 6, 8 months or so, 6, 7, 8 months, just
I
with
think so.
things going on. And she like didn't have to do any of that. And I just like, as soon as I met you, and talked to you, I was just like, wow, like like a good person, a genuine good person. And I was just really excited to have you in my
Oh, thank you.
so yeah, so this has been a long time coming. She's just very busy, but yes, I want you to introduce yourself and tell everybody a little bit about what you do. Better than I just said it. I'm sure you can explain it.
Well, we don't want to spend too much time on that. I'm Dr. Dawn-Elise Snipes. I have my licensed professional counselor right now in Tennessee and Florida. Once the counseling compact goes into effect, hopefully I'll be adding several more states. But that allows me to practice in different states. I run AllCEUs, which trains addictions clinicians as well as mental health counselors. And I really started that back in 2006 because I saw at that point I was getting continuing education and paying an arm and a leg. It was costing me, more than a day's worth of pay. And I'm like, that ain't right.
Oh my God.
So I started AllCEUs, and we were what you call a disruptor. We started offering unlimited CEUs for a very, very low price. And we kept getting people going, is this a scam? So we actually raised our price a little bit, but we've maintained ourselves as still one of the most affordable providers. So that was really what got me started. And the videos on the YouTube channel, I was getting to a point, actually started out as the content for the courses on AllCEUs. And my feeling is it's important to pay it forward and helping people translate research to practice. So I have the videos, which are a little bit more academic than a lot of the other channels out there, but that's okay. That makes me unique. And then if people want certificates and certifications and that stuff, that's when they have to pay. But getting the knowledge, totally free. And that's important to me because there are people, we've actually recently started getting several signups from a couple of different countries in Africa. And obviously their economic situation is very different than the US. So that's really been a blessing for me to be able to help people in, I guess you call them second world areas, places where their economic situation just not as good. And I've written a couple of books, but they just kind of do their thing. I prefer teaching. I love teaching. I love doing clinical supervision, and that's probably where I'm going to stay for the rest of my foreseeable career.
I love it. Yeah, I just like I was so excited to talk to you. But You're so humble when you talk about that. I bought her book off of Amazon and I've done a few videos on it and people loved it. So thanks for that.
Awesome. Well, thank you. Thank
Yeah,
you for
Journey
talking
to
about it.
Recovery one. Yeah, it's great. I did post the link in the video description so everybody could see it. But yeah, it's a workbook, you guys, for people entering and in addiction, and it's great. And it's not just substances. It's all addictions. Another thing. So what is your specialty? Like you're all encompassing though, right? Like what do you
Yeah, well, I tend to focus, and it's kind of all encompassing, on trauma informed dual disorder treatment. So most of the mental health issues I focus on are the uh, mood disorders like anxiety, depression, and then PTSD, and a few of those things. I don't do a whole lot with people with psychotic disorders like schizophrenia. That's just not where I've had the bulk of my training. And I don't work with kids. Not, I love kids, but that requires really specialized training to do it well and not cause harm. So I stay in my own lane, and it's a pretty wide lane, which is nice because 2 days are never the same.
That's so cool. Yeah, and oh my gosh. Yeah, so anybody has any questions, please put them in the chat. We'll wait till the end to go over them and answer them, but feel free to drop them in the chat whenever you want to. But so today I wanted to talk about, a number of things, but related to psychological abuse, relational abuse, and healing is the most important part, right? So which it's all trauma. And I wanted her to explain more about how psychological abuse occurs, like what exactly is it, all the things. So, and we were talking about before we went on, she's known personal things about me, as I said, and known what has been going on a little bit in my world. And so she knows a little bit about what I'm already trying to ask her. But yeah, so I want to ask you, what is, some people that say abuse, what can abuse be like how do you describe abuse? Because a lot of people say, oh, it's physical only, and I don't know why people still say that, but here we are.
Well, if you go to your classes on abuse, they will say it's emotional, it's physical, it's sexual, it's financial. And those are the ones that they typically kind of all lump together. But it is important to recognize that emotional abuse and neglect is every bit as damaging, if not more damaging, to people than some of the other types of abuse. And we can't discount that. We can't discount the impact that words have on our loved ones. And I'm not saying that words are weapons and, we need to be afraid of them. When I was a little kid, we used to say, I'm rubber and you're glue. What you say bounces off me and sticks to you.
Yeah.
Which actually helps me sometimes, even at my age. But especially the things that our significant others and our caregivers tell us, in those relationships, we've let down our boundaries. We've let down our guard. Theoretically, we respect their opinion. And when they start telling us things that are hurtful or gaslighting us, we tend to think, oh, well, maybe that's right. And we start questioning our own perceptions about our goodness, our lovableness, our safety. Abuse and neglect are both trauma experiences in my book. And trauma, the core feature of trauma is it leaves you feeling unsafe and powerless in your life, in your skin.
Mm-hmm.
Some traumas are a little bit more specific. But when we talk about relational trauma, that tends to permeate into all of our relationships.
Yeah.
I trusted this person and I gave them my heart, and then they stomped all over it, Can I trust anybody else? And then you start becoming hyper vigilant or hyper aware, looking for clues in everybody else that whether they're going to harm you or not. When you're in that frame of mind, when you're in that threat state, guess what you notice?
Mm.
Guess how you interpret things. Even if it's something that's benign, the person didn't mean anything by it, you may interpret it as a threat, which makes you start believing that everybody everywhere, to use some cognitive distortions, everybody everywhere is dangerous. And yeah, people can be dangerous. Everybody, in my estimation, has the capacity to be dangerous, but are they going to be? And
Mm.
that's a judgment call we've got to make, and sometimes we have to make on the fly. When I work with, yeah, I spent 20 some odd years working in a co-occurring treatment facility, and some of the people I worked with, when they're using, are not safe people.
Right.
Um, their behaviors, they're good people, but their behaviors are not safe to be around. They tend to be, you know, they get into that stinking thinking.
Mhm.
And I think it's also important, and I know I'm rambling,
No,
um,
you're
to
not.
recognize that addictions aren't just substances. We can have an addictive relationship. And what are the characteristics of an addiction? You spend more time doing it, thinking about it, or recovering from it than you intended. You spend more money. You give up important things or relationships in order to maintain that thing.
Mhm.
It starts causing you significant, uh, in your own estimation, harm in one or more areas of your life. And that can be physical. You're feeling sick and tired all the time, or you're injured or whatever. Um, it can be problems in your relationships. Maybe you're so focused on that person that you're neglecting your children, your loved ones. And so we do really need to recognize that addictions come in a lot of different flavors, if you will,
Mhm.
and they're no less harmful if it's a relationship versus cocaine.
Mhm.
It's going to have, when it becomes addictive, it's going to have a negative impact.
Well, and I was talking to you and I said, I don't know why this feels so much like an addiction to where it's illogical, right?
Mhm.
And you described to me exactly that, and it made a lot of sense to me and helped me. And because I know addiction, that I could feel a lot of those things and insanity, like people would say, like um, you know, engaging in this behavior or relationship with someone despite ongoing consequences that where I don't know if you'd say consequences, but I mean it's trauma, right? And so I think another thing too is the the gaslighting. I really think a lot of people, there's a lot of people on the internet, on YouTube, that talk about narcissism and gaslighting and all of those things and toxic people. And I wanted to know how can you describe gaslighting? Because you mentioned it too, and I like the proper meaning of it and what it is.
You're not going to find it in the dictionary. So we've kind of, um, created this term, but essentially gaslighting, and you probably know it dates back to Alfred Hitchcock movie from like 1940 or something.
Yeah.
But gaslighting is when somebody tries to make you believe that your perceptions, your thoughts, your memories are inaccurate. That's not how it happened. Oh, no, I was wonderful to you. You left me. Or, um, I we can come up with all different kinds of scenarios. But if you start questioning yourself, I had to go before a board this past week, and I was presenting. I wasn't in trouble. But I went up there and I was asking a question, and I had already provided all the research and everything. So I didn't come armed thinking I'd have to defend myself. And one of the board members laid into me and told me things. He said, what you're saying is an absolute untruth. It's not true. And I'm like, no, I read this over multiple times. I've had multiple people read it. And I'm thinking to myself that, but I was so caught off guard that, and it wasn't the appropriate place to try to argue the point anyway. But by the time I left there, I was got into my car and I called my husband. And I'm like, I'm not sure if I'm going to pass out, throw up, or cry. And that's when you know you're being gaslit, when you start feeling completely powerless because somebody is just doing their best to convince you that you're crazy.
Oh my gosh, that's such a good example. Wow.
Yeah.
Well,
Wish I didn't have it, but
no, I'm sorry about that. But yeah, that's a perfect way to describe it because I never really understood it until the past year or so, what it really meant and how it felt. And I just thought it was kind of a buzzword. And I know it has become kind of a buzzword, and so has narcissism and this and that, you know, because it's not even a mental health disorder. Like, it's a personality disorder, and it's not even like narcissism isn't even like the disorder, right? Or the personality disorder. It's narcissistic personality disorder. And then there's traits and style and all that, right? It's like a spectrum. Is that how it works?
It's not really a spectrum. You're either you either have narcissistic personality disorder or you don't. But most people don't meet the criteria for narcissistic personality disorder. We have
Right.
what we kind of offhandedly refer to as narcissistic traits, which means you have some of these symptoms. It's kind of like when you go to the doctor and they're trying to figure out what to diagnose you with, and you've only got 3 out of 7 symptoms, and the doctor says, well, that's not enough for me to diagnose you with chronic fatigue syndrome or whatever it is. I hear you have these symptoms or these issues right now. And narcissistic behaviors, we were talking before we went live, behavior is always communication.
Yes.
And each time somebody does something that we perceive as narcissistic, I think it's important for us to step back and go, number one, what was that person trying to communicate? Were they saying, I feel scared?
Mhm.
Were they saying, I feel like I deserve to be in charge? Which could be. Are we perceiving it differently than it was intended? Some people come off as kind of arrogant or kind of harsh when that's just because that's their personality. I have a friend of mine, a couple of friends who are lifelong sales people and marketer people. And they are all about telling you how awesome they are. And it's just not something I'm used to. It doesn't mean they're narcissistic.
Right.
It's just the culture that they have come up in. So recognizing that sometimes a person's behaviors may be indicative of something that's going on in them. It may be indicative of the culture they came through, or it may be indicative they're doing something and we're totally misperceiving it.
True.
We're thinking they're trying to tell us how wonderful they are and make us feel bad about themselves, when in reality, maybe they're trying to toot their own horn because they feel inadequate.
Yeah.
And they're saying, will you be my friend? Because I have all of these things.
So true. Oh, you're fine. So Mrs. J asked, what are the symptoms? Thank you in advance. Yeah, so because of the DSM probably, I assume she's asking, maybe.
Yes. And there is a whole laundry list of symptoms. I'm not going to remember most of them. With well, let me back up. Before I launch into that,
Let me take
my personal viewpoint, and this is not the viewpoint of the American Psychological Association.
That's okay.
My personal viewpoint, I just want to couch that, is that most, if not all, personality disorders, because they have to start in childhood, are behavioral reactions to a traumatic, chaotic environment. So what we're looking at is complex post-traumatic stress that just manifests in a bunch of different ways. However, help that child survive, whether it was histrionic, where they have to be the center of attention and they're drama queens or kings, or borderline, where they dysregulate and they start self-harming because they're afraid of abandonment, or narcissistic. And there's, like 9 others.
Right.
But
That's important to point out.
and even avoidant personality disorder, which is a whole different cluster.
Yeah.
Think about, if I'm avoidant of relationships, if I have no desire to engage with others, where'd that come from?
Mm-hmm.
What would have prompted that? So anyway, did you want to say something first?
Well, yeah, I wanted you to talk more about that too. And I'm so glad you brought that up, because I already forgot about it. But because of how personality disorders, it's not like someone just becomes narcissistic one day or this and that. And I was wondering if you could talk about, maybe after this, but about the trauma and how that becomes like that. Because we've talked about some of the stuff too, because I'm always looking at like my childhood, and you can see how it affects, right? Like different relationships, everything affects every relationship in your life, right? And so I was wondering if you could explain like the trauma and its relation to that after you describe some of that.
Okay. So for example, narcissistic personality. It's important to remember that in the DSM, which is the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders, there's a section on personality disorders. So narcissism or narcissistic personality is characterized by a sense of grandiosity, typically by lying or blowing things out of proportion in order to look better than you are, a lack of empathy. And I want to emphasize that there are a lot of people who actually do, if you want to look at it, qualify technically for narcissistic personality, that do have empathy. Too often people say narcissists don't have empathy. Well, a lot of them don't, but a lot of them do. So we can't rule somebody in or out based on that. So it's important to recognize that they tend to use people for their own gain. I'm going to be friends with you in order to get a promotion, in order to get connections, or because you're really pretty and I need, somebody on my arm that makes me feel good about myself. And then and refusing to associate with others that they believe are beneath them. I will only associate with people who are of high status. And we can think about some of that even if we go to particular schools. If I went to this Ivy League school, then, I don't want to associate with you people who went to state schools. And not everybody who went to Ivy League schools is like that. But it is important to be aware of those traits and recognize, again, whether it is something that they were indoctrinated into. If you went to this school for 6 years and that's all you heard, then, you get out, you may start believing it.
True.
If it is a reaction to trauma, if I grew up in a very impoverished environment, that, I don't want to be associated with that. I don't want to remember that because it was traumatic. So I only want to associate with these people out here because it doesn't remind me of that.
Wow. And so do you think attachment theory and all that is like right in there? Because, I'm like obsessed with learning about it lately. I'm just beginning my journey, so I don't know,
Attachment theory, in my opinion, is at the core of the majority of personality disorders, because The primary caregiver is responsible for meeting the child's needs and helping them feel safe and develop emotional intelligence and learn how to cope not only with the world, but also with what's going on inside them. And if the caregiver is not there physically or emotionally, then the child kind of feels like they're out there flapping in the breeze and they do the best they can. Remember, children do not think the same as adults. They're not little adults. Children think in all or none terms. You love me, you hate me. Well, what do we see with borderline personality disorder? You love me, you hate me. So that is what we call a schema or a mental shortcut that the child developed when they were very young based on what was going on, trying to understand, what do I need to do to stay safe? I need you to love me. Otherwise, I'm 3. I can't go to the store. So I need to figure out what it is I need to do to make you love me, if whatever that is. And go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, so if you could talk about them more specifically too. I know I'm all over the place, but a lot of this stuff is so important, I think, that people don't know about the different attachment styles and how the relation to the caregivers, like how those become, like what they coordinate with.
Okay. So the mnemonic I usually use for attachment is CARES. Consistency, attentive, responsiveness, encouragement, and safety. And that's what caregivers are responsible for. As a caregiver, when I was, young, but we also have attachments when in our adult life. They're just not as unifocused. We have a few friends that we can count on, but we'll just stick with that primary attachment. If I'm a young child and my caregiver sometimes is there, and sometimes is not, or sometimes responds lovingly and sometimes is a real not nice person, it's going to feel chaotic and it's going to be scary. I'm going to be afraid to approach them when I need something because I don't know if I'm going to get Jekyll or Hyde.
Right.
Attention, as I use it in the mnemonic, is when a caregiver spends proactive time with the child, not sitting there scrolling on social media all day long and putting the kid in front of the TV or giving them a tablet and saying, go, just do something. But when the caregiver takes time out of their day to say, you know what, you're important to me, and I would really like to know about you. I've shared stories before about my son, and he used to love to play with the little Matchbox cars and everything. And I wanted to spend time with him so desperately, but I couldn't get into it. And he picked up on that. So he would get up and toddle away. He's like, okay, I'm bored. But anyway, long story short, I ended up figuring out I want to spend time with him. And it seems like he wants to spend time with me. I mean, he's 2.5. I can't read his mind. But so we found things that we enjoy doing together. And that enabled us to have quality time where I wasn't forcing it and he wasn't bored. And, but that attention communicates to the child, you're important and you're lovable and for who you are, not for what you do. I want to spend time with you. Then we go down to responsiveness. The caregiver, and I think we all, you have kids, when our children start to get upset, we can respond. Children can't identify feelings. We need to teach them feeling words. Children generally can't identify early warning signs. We need to help them identify early warning signs. My son, again, when he was little, he's always had ADHD. He was micropreemie, so he's neuroatypical. And when he would start to get overwhelmed, or we call it overstimulated, he would need to go sit down in his room. And we had one wall that was just blank white. There was nothing on it. I mean, he had stuff up on other walls. But I remember one day he walked up to me when I was sitting at the computer doing some work, and he said, "Mommy, I overstimulated."
Oh.
Popped his binky in his mouth, toddled in, got into his little fire engine bed, and stared at the wall for about 10 minutes. And when he felt like he had it together, he came back out. But that's not something that most children are going to pick up on their own.
Wow.
He was able to identify that early, I'm feeling kind of like I'm going to lose it.
Yeah.
And take appropriate action. And that's our job as caregivers, to help them learn how to identify the issue, identify the feeling, tolerate the distress, examine the situation, and figure out how to respond. I mean, that's all emotional intelligence. And when we don't have that, I mean, think about how scary for us as adults it feels sometimes when our grief or our anger or our depression is just overwhelming. Think about how a 3 or 4-year-old feels when they're scared to death.
Wow.
And the caregiver doesn't respond. So then the kid goes, well, I better figure this out on my own. Then we go down to encouragement. That's pretty self-explanatory. Not being enmeshed, not trying to control and tell the child how to do everything, but helping them figure out how to do it. Providing, there's a term called scaffolding, but that encouragement goes a long way. It says, I think you're competent. I think you can do this. So that helps children develop a sense of self-esteem and self-confidence, which when we have that, then when we try something and we fail, it's like, well, that didn't work, as opposed to feeling like we are failures. And separating the behavior from the person is so important. When a child grows up in a chaotic environment and doesn't have encouragement, they don't know what they can do. And they are just pretty much spending their entire childhood in fight or flight.
Wow.
When we're in fight or flight, we do not learn. When you're in fight or flight, you've got a chemical called glutamate that's kind of surging through your brain that says, you need to worry about surviving right now. You don't need to worry about learning math or whatever else it is. So the child is kind of spitballing things, trying to figure out what's going to help him stay safe today, and going on from there. And there's nobody there to say, hey, I see where that might have worked for you in the past. Let's talk about some other ways to address that besides, if you're angry, besides throwing a toy at me.
Right.
And then safety. That goes to that unconditional positive regard where you say, you know what? And separating the child from the behavior. You're not a bad child. That was a bad behavior. I love you, but we ain't going to do that. And there's going to be consequences.
Right.
But think about a person, a child who doesn't have those parameters,
Right.
who doesn't believe that their caregiver is going to be there to help them, to provide safety, and sometimes, and with insecure attachment, sometimes the caregivers do it, and sometimes they don't. And it's that inconsistency. It's like, well, somebody gonna help me today or not? With avoidant attachment, the person has often experienced a lot of harsh criticism, and there hasn't been any good with it. So if caregiver responded, it was generally not a good thing. And so obviously they say, too dangerous. You're hurtful. I don't want to be around you because it hurts too much. The person who's anxiously attached is going to fawn. They're just going to be like, what do I need to do to make you help me, to love me, to stay? Now, interestingly, there's another one called disorganized.
Yeah.
And that's a combination of both of them. So that's the epitome of inconsistency.
Right.
But a lot of times with disorganized attachment, the person will fawn as long as they can. It's like, what do I need to do? And they'll reach a certain point, or it's just like, screw it.
Yep.
And then get away. But then not too long later, a week, a month, sometimes a day, they're back to fawning. It's like, okay, I've got some energy back. Let me see how I can fix this. And attachment styles can differ between people. If you may have insecure attachment with caregiver types, anxious attachment, and avoidant attachment with authority figures.
Mm-hmm.
So just kind of being aware, and then going back and asking yourself, why did I develop that reaction to that person?
Mm-hmm.
So attachment is very interesting.
Yeah.
And when we don't feel safe, again, children try to figure out the best way they can to survive. And they've been doing the best they can to survive until now. But like I said, your children who are in that state, when they are feeling threatened, whether it's because they don't have enough food and they don't have a roof over their head, or because they're being abused, or their caregivers are in active addiction, or whatever the case is, when children don't feel safe, they are not going to learn. So the skills that other children their age learn on how to cope with emotions, how to interact with others, how to feel good about themselves, how to have confidence, that's irrelevant. They're trying to figure out how to survive. And so then you end up with people who are adults who often have these primitive coping skills and primitive interpersonal skills because they didn't have the benefit or the luxury of learning that stuff. That was not super present in their mind.
Wow. Okay. So we talked about enmeshment before too, me and you. Will you explain what that does because of how the autonomy with the and not being able to detach from the mother and how that affects it too?
Enmeshment is, you could consider it a form of abuse.
Yeah.
It's not intentional. The caregiver is not saying, I want to,
Right.
try to screw up this kid's life. Enmeshment often results because the caregiver is desperately trying to either relive their childhood and get it right this time, or they're trying to, in their own way, trying to protect the child from themselves. So in an enmeshed relationship, the enmesher, if you will, violates the enmeshee's boundaries, constantly telling them what they're to think, what they're to feel, what they're to do, who they're to hang out with. And I think most of us, when we were in school, knew somebody or some buddies who had parents who were like this.
Yeah.
Anybody who's watched Dance Moms probably has seen the same behavior. And it's important to understand that if a child is constantly being told what to think, what to do, who to hang out with, then if that person goes away and quits directing their life, cuts the marionette strings, they kind of go to pieces. They're like, I don't know how to think for myself.
Yeah.
I need you to tell me how to do it.
Right. Yeah, that was a great explanation. So essentially, to sum that up, it's personality disorders are not formed out of nowhere, and a lot of it has to do with the attachment style, or from our childhood, how our caregivers were with us. There our relation, right? Like,
and I've gone through on several videos on my channel, and I've gone through the symptoms of NPD and BPD, and I've talked about what could those symptoms actually be communicating, and how could they have developed out of trauma? Because people who are diagnosed with personality disorders, rightly or wrongly, are pathologized. And there are a lot of treatment programs, for example, that won't take people who have a personality disorder. And I'm like, but it's trauma, and people who are in active addiction often appear, their behaviors often appear antisocial.
yes.
Why? because I need to keep my drug. I need to keep my whatever. And if you don't like it, tough tiddlywinks.
Mhm.
So that can come off as antisocial. They are foregoing things that are important and relationships that are important to get their drug. Um, and that can seem that's hurtful to the people who get kind of cast aside, but it's not because they don't love them. It's because
Right.
they can't survive. Once you become tolerant on that substance, once your nervous system actually adjusts to being in active addiction, then when you're not using,
Mm.
you are in acute withdrawal or post acute withdrawal, depending on how long it's been, but you don't feel the same. And many people use whatever the addiction is, many people use to numb pain. So when you stop using and the pain's there and you're going, ah, what do I do? And numbing the pain the only way you know how seems to be the only way to survive. And those that are on the outside may perceive it as, oh, my love's not enough. Well, no, it's not actually, because it's not all about you. Thank you very much. Um,
Oh my gosh, I love you. You're so funny. Someone else asked about codependency. What is codependency? Is it? I mean, I have such mixed feelings about it. I don't know. I mean, I do know, but I don't know how I feel about it.
Essentially, I'm, the shorthand version, I guess, is I liken it to relationship addiction.
Okay,
Co-
that makes sense.
Codependency is when somebody uses a relationship in order to help themselves feel safe and secure. And a lot of people who experience trauma when they were growing up, a chaotic childhood, if they weren't the one doing it, it didn't get done. If they weren't taking care of controlling things, it was unsafe. So they learn those skills and they carry them into adulthood. Then they get into relationships with people who tolerate that behavior, who are generally struggling themselves, and repeat the pattern. If you do what I say, then you'll be okay.
Right.
If you know, act right, and then if you don't take my advice, because it does come from a place in their heart, it totally comes from the right place. They're not trying to be harmful or hateful. They're trying to fix you.
Mhm.
And they weren't able to fix their caregivers or the person that led them to develop these behaviors, which could be later in life. Um,
Right.
so sometimes it's repeating the past, trying to get a different result. Insanity.
Wow. Yeah, that's so okay. So what about so we talked about how what questions do you guys have? Which direction? Because there's so many different directions I could go in. Let me make sure, let me see if there's any questions so far that because I want to talk about so how does the trauma bonding happen specifically? Like if you could explain that. Like in a
Okay.
is it only with narcissists? Is it only like what everybody relates them together. Why is that? Like is can it be with anybody?
Narcissists, yeah, anybody who's abusive.
Okay, okay. That makes sense.
There has to be a trauma going on in the person's life, and whether that person is even neglectful, a neglectful parent, who's not meeting the child's needs, the child is in this fear state. And a trauma bond forms between the two of them where the child says, I can't survive without you. So I need to figure out what I need to do to make you stay. And I can't survive without you. And that just keeps repeating itself in that relationship. So every time they try to disconnect, the child is drawn right back because they're like, I can't survive without you. And trauma bonds are developed as a result of ongoing distress and trauma, whereas Stockholm syndrome, which I think a lot of people are familiar with,
Mhm.
typically involves one acute, really stressful event. With a trauma bond, the person who develops that bond starts empathizing with the abuser, um, and starts questioning their own sanity, questioning their own perceptions, and, oh, it must not be that bad. It could be worse, whatever else they're hearing. Um, but because it was developed in a way that ultimately the person who was causing the trauma was also the rescuer.
Mm,
And that really screws with your brain.
wow.
You help me and you hurt me at the same time. How's that work? Um, and it makes it a lot harder to get over, a lot harder to break, and until you start recognizing uh, what the facts are versus what your perceptions are. Can you survive?
Why is that so hard
Maybe.
for us to do, like, in a relationship, to see, like, this isn't this it's almost exactly what you said of, um, this person, we when we start to realize, "Oh, I'm in pain because of the relationship with this person," right? Whatever it may be. And then all of a sudden, it's like an unease of, I need that person to make me feel better too, like exactly what you're just saying. So how do you break that? Like how do you even know? Because that was the hardest thing for me ever to even agree with and accept.
And I think you said it part of it earlier.
Yeah.
It's very similar to alcohol.
Yeah.
When you start using alcohol, it numbs the pain and it seems like it's a good fit. And then you start realizing you get that unease one day that maybe this ain't working for me. And you quit and you go through detox and, suffer through the post acute withdrawal. And then somewhere along the way, you reach a place where you're feeling overwhelmed again
Yeah.
and you numb it with alcohol. And with the relationship, with the trauma bond, a lot of times you detox from it and then you reach a place where you start feeling, because you don't love yourself, because you don't have a secure attachment with yourself, you start reaching that place where you feel isolated and lonely and like nobody is ever going to love you. So you try to go back
Oh my
and
God.
hoping that person is going to change this time. And they ain't. You are playing, you're their little yo-yo, and they know you'll come back. They just have to kind of sit it out.
Yep. Wow. That's it's my chest. Um, that's exactly what was so confusing for me, in my experience was understanding why logically it didn't make sense. It's the same with all addictions for me. And then with the person to be like, well, I've already separated, but then my mind starts playing tricks on me. And then it's like, oh, I need this person. What is that? That's what it is, right? It's like, oh, now I need this person. But then when would have them back, it's like, it's like reality hits again. And I'm like, no, but I don't, I was right that I don't. It's weird.
And there can be a projection.
Yeah.
If you, for example, had a bad relationship with your father and you get into a relationship with somebody, as an adult, and in some ways they remind you of your dad. A
Yeah.
lot of us tend to, get in relationships with people who remind us of our parents. And if that starts falling apart, it's reopening those old trauma wounds from never connecting, never having that secure attachment with your father, um, which is a little Freudian in nature. But our brains don't just say, oh, okay, well, that didn't work, or as a child, if we're not able to connect with our caregiver, children take things personally. It
Yeah.
must be me. You
Yeah.
must have relapsed because of me. You must be angry because of me. You must have left because of me. that memory gets stored in the person's head. Maybe they try to keep it shoved back in a closet, but it's stored back there. And so when another relationship that's similar in some ways starts falling apart, those things that you told yourself as a child, that inner child starts screaming, "I told you so." And a lot of times people will try to heal their childhood wounds in adult relationships. Recognizing, as an adult, I recognize I can't fix my relationship with my dad for whatever reason, but let me try to do it here. Let me prove that it wasn't me.
Right.
Um,
That's
and that
exactly
can be,
what we talked about, that I felt that's why it was deepening, right? Is
Mhm.
it the same with mothers too? If the Okay, so it doesn't matter the sex, right?
And it doesn't matter whether it's an intimate relationship or not. If you had a problem with your mother
Yeah.
and you have a female friend who, you know, they can start triggering it.
Gotcha.
And it's important to be kind of aware of that. I had a supervisor um, several years ago that was a very strong woman
Mhm.
and kind of had some anger management issues, but in a lot of ways, she reminded me of my own mother. And I just desperately, desperately wanted her approval. But I was also desperately, desperately terrified at the same time.
Yeah.
And, when
Wow.
she would get mad, she would you could hear her screaming, like out in the lobby, screaming at people, um, which, not necessarily the most appropriate, um, but I just remember thinking, why is it that I care so much about what this person thinks about me? And then I realized I got mommy issues.
Yeah, that's exactly Oh, I love how you explain that. It's so true. That's exactly how, and we had talked about that too. And in my other therapist, I talked about that too. The connection between, um, is it almost like as if, I think you said it, that we couldn't, it's like recreating the same,
Mhm,
connection and over and
mhm.
over. And then, so how do you break that? That's probably a whole
The first
days of explanation, but
the first thing is to recognize what you're doing.
okay.
That you're trying to heal a relationship because we're born that our primary caregivers we're supposed to have an attachment with. And when
Right.
that attachment doesn't happen, that just sets a whole spiral in motion for our love map, if you will. So we may try to um, recreate things later, but recognizing when you're getting into similar relationships, when you're seeing or feeling something, what is that feeling coming from? Why is it that I need this person's approval so bad? Is it because I need their approval? Or are they reminding me of somebody whose approval I needed? Once you start becoming aware of it, then you got to grieve. You have to grieve the loss of that original relationship. And with fresh eyes as an adult, looking back, being able to say, you know what, it wasn't me. Um, yeah, I may have done some really hurtful or crazy things as a kid, but that didn't mean I wasn't worthy of love.
Right.
And grieving the fact that you didn't have Warden June Cleaver as your parents.
Mhm.
Um, a lot of people, a lot of people um, end up having to go through that and accept you can't change the past.
Yeah.
So that's a whole grief process. Not only that you didn't have that childhood, but you didn't follow a different path because you didn't have that childhood. So we call those secondary losses.
Mhm.
What did you lose because you didn't have that support, because you didn't have that self confidence?
Right.
Um, Grieving that is really important in order to free yourself up from trying to fix it. And once you move on to uh, acknowledging it and healing that hurt, you won't need to try to recreate. You actually may see people that remind you of that person and go, "Oh no, that danger warning sign, Will Robinson, let me get out of here.
Yeah.
And that's good. That's healthy. That's becoming more mindful of what's going on with you and why it's going on. Everything has a why, but sometimes you got to scratch your head and think about what it means, whether it's your feelings or your behaviors. And ultimately, at every experience we have gets filed somewhere in our brain.
Yeah.
And they get kind of mushed together to make what we call schema, or shortcuts, so we can anticipate what's going to happen next. If most of your memories are traumatic, are stressful, are, unsupportive, then that's how you're those are the goggles that you're going to view the world through.
Yeah.
And if your relationships with somebody that you really, desperately wanted approval with, is toxic, then you may recreate that or expect it even, because you're trying to figure out how to fix it, trying to figure out how to make the hurt go away. And you
Yes.
can't do that with somebody new. You
Yeah.
got to go to the past.
It doesn't work. And Mitch said something excellent here. I won't keep you too long. I know you probably have to
Oh, you're fine.
keep going.
And
Okay.
grieve for losing yourself in the relationship. That
Yeah,
is so very true.
wow.
So often, and that's true for the childhood relationship too. You lost who you were,
Yeah.
trying to be whatever your caregiver wanted you to be. And that's why a lot of people with mental health issues have a characteristic of being sort of a chameleon. They try to be whatever they think anybody wants them to be, just to prevent abandonment.
Yeah, I can totally, I that's one thing I've recognized. So another thing too is, so I bet there's a lot of people here that have been through, oh, look at what Dawn said. Most grieve the relationship, but not themselves. That's such a good point.
Mhm.
Jean said,
Similarly, before you go on to that,
yeah.
most people work on developing secure attachment with others, but not themselves. And
Ooh,
we need to be consistent, attentive, responsive, encouraging, and safe to ourselves.
yeah,
Sometimes the most damaging, abusive things that happen to you, that are said to you, are said by you in your own head.
yes. The inner critic. And then isn't that usually like from like other people growing up that you hear in your head? I'm like motioning like this. But so how can one reset the central nervous system? Oh, she has an excellent video or two on that I hold on, what's her name? Miss J. I didn't see, I can't tell which one she's posting, but if she could post some of those of your videos, that'd be awesome. Complex PTSD, or thanks in advance. Yeah.
Releasing trauma trapped in your body. One of the things that happens, do we have a certain time we need to end?
No, I'm good. We can go as long as you don't, I don't.
Yeah. When somebody is in persistent fight or flee, the vagus nerve, which is our relaxation nerve, becomes very weak. It becomes non-responsive. It's like, what's the point? I'm going to go sleep. So we talk about improving what they call vagal tone, and it's not a muscle, but it's the best, I guess, the best word we could come up with, and that's helping people activate that vagus nerve when necessary. Yoga, for example. And if you've got trauma, I would caution you before you do yoga to make sure that you feel safe doing it, because that focus on internal sensations can be really triggering. There is trauma-focused yoga, but I digress. Yoga, when you're holding a pose or when you're trying to get into a pose, your stress response gets activated. After a little while, those muscles start going, ready to go. And breathing through it, activating that vagus nerve, helps you reduce your heart rate so you can continue to hold that. When people chew gum, when people sing really loudly or scream really loudly, those are all things that can help trigger that vagus nerve. You can also put one finger on the little flappy thing in your ear, which is called the tragus, and one finger behind it, and you can rub. Now, you don't rub hard, just enough to move the skin, and it may give you a little tingly feeling. That's called auricular vagus nerve stimulation. But that can also help when you start feeling yourself getting stressed out. If you're not one that is into doing the square breathing or something, well, this is something you can do. Figuring out what can help you, because you're basically going to have to manually trigger that vagus nerve at first until it starts waking up and going, okay, this is no big deal. You know, I can handle this, and it can turn off the fight or flight response. The other thing that people usually overlook is when you're releasing trauma from your body, you're healing your HPA axis, you're healing your stress response. Now, when you were in that dysregulated state, that fight or flight state for so long, your brain basically remodeled itself. So think about having detours instead of going on the interstate. And when you start healing, the brain has to repave those paths and create, it's actually a process called neurogenesis, create new neurons that go a different way and that function based on different neurotransmitters. And your gut microbiome, when you're stressed, is altered, which alters the levels of different neurochemicals. There's a lot of blah, blah, blah to say sleep, nutrition, and actual physiological relaxation. Yes, it's important. Burning the candle at both ends is just going to trigger your stress response.
Yes.
Not having adequate sleep will trigger the stress response. And every time you do that, you're basically think of it like killing those neurons again. It may not be quite that extreme, but ultimately that's what you're doing. Your brain's trying to rebuild a new pathway. And then all of a sudden you go, no, let's go back and use this one again. Your brain's like, what am I supposed to do? So we need to recognize that stress is physical as well as emotional, as well as cognitive. I think most of us have been in a class or a lecture or something that just seemed to go on forever. And by the end of the day, you felt like you'd been hit by a truck. You know, it's like, oh, I just want to go home and crawl in bed.
Yeah.
Your brain actually uses a whole lot of energy. It uses a whole lot of blood glucose. So whereas learning and doing things that are cognitively stimulating are important, don't get me wrong, but just like exercise, you can overdo it. And it's important to pace yourself as you're getting back into things so you don't trigger that stress response unnecessarily. And you're allowing your body to heal. Think about it. If you break your arm, you're going to put it in a cast and you're not going to use it. If you break your arm and you continue to go about work like nothing, like you're not hurt, it's going to take a whole lot longer for those bones to knit back together. And your nervous system's no different. You need to try not to overtax it.
That's exactly. So it's like, I know this stuff, but this morning I slept in so late. I mean, it wasn't even morning. I slept until like noon, and my mom's like texting me, like worried about me and everything. It's like, no, like my body, like I'm exhausted. My brain is just taxed. And you'd said, yeah, that's your nervous system and everything. It's like trying to heal. And it's like, duh. I totally didn't even think of it, because I'm like, this is really all this stuff, and the stress has really been wearing me down, and the constant, I don't know what word you would say, the chaos and everything, right? It's just, it's not something that I'm used to. And so it's a lot. And so I'm trying to be very nice to myself, right?
Good. And one of the challenging things when you are online, whether it's X or YouTube or whatever is, and we saw the same thing with Insta and Facebook way back when they first came onto the scene. That's 24/7 input. And
Yeah.
it's hard to relax if you're worried that you're going to be trolled. If
Yeah.
you're worried that somebody's going to do something awful, it's really hard to be able to relax. And that persistent fear or feeling of being unsafe, even though physically you're safe, your reputation, your friendships, your job might not be. That's freaking exhausting.
Right. Yeah, it's a lot. And the need to want to correct people on the facts or this and that, it really is fruitless. And and I remember you had said to me, "Don't feed the trolls," and I was like laughing so hard, but it's so true. And like I have a hard time doing that sometimes, but hey, it's a work in progress. Yeah,
And I think we all do. It's a natural reaction when somebody takes your power. You want to snatch it back.
yeah, and
But
keep trying.
stopping there, yeah. And you may have seen my video on acceptance and commitment therapy.
Yeah, I
Where
like it a lot, actually.
ultimately it's you're asking yourself, is what I'm doing helping me move toward or away from what's important in my rich and meaningful life? And I remember one time when my daughter was 11, I had some trolls and on Facebook. I wasn't on YouTube very much at that point. And I was like texting back and I was getting all upset about things that they had said, sometimes not even texting. And
Mhm.
my 11-year-old daughter looks at me. She goes, "Mom, is getting upset about this helping you move toward or away from what's important?"
Oh my
I'm
gosh.
like, "Shut up."
Oh
I
my God,
didn't say
I love
shut up,
that.
but
No, I know. Silas
but
says stuff like that to me too, and he goes, "What are you upset about?" And I go, "Excuse me." You're
my
smart.
when my son was really little, I remember one day him being in the car seat and I got cut off in traffic and
Uh-huh.
I started like ranting at this person and this little voice from the back, "Mommy, they can't hear you."
I say that to my mom too. It's so true.
Well, it makes me feel better. But
It's so funny. They're too smart. Oh my God.
yeah, yeah, sometimes. But
I forget what you were saying.
and I would agree with you, Mitch. Social media can make us have more difficulty focusing for any period of time and make it more difficult, partly because of the stress it causes a lot of people. When we're stressed, we can't focus. Our prefrontal cortex, our executive functioning, all that stuff that is amiss in people with ADHD, well, it goes amiss when we're stressed. So
Yeah,
if we're constantly stressed, if we're fearing missing out, and just the fact that it just scrolls and scrolls and scrolls, certainly contributes to our difficulty in uh, a lot of skills that are associated with ADHD. And I know myself, I've never had a long attention span, but it has gotten worse over the years. Yeah,
for sure. Well, there was one thing that you talked to me about before, and you said about how when you're healing from something like a relationship, a friendship, or something with someone, like a toxic person or whatever, and I think you said something about needing to repeat your story, because I was getting a lot of pushback for talking about it, my situation, and what you had said. Will you repeat that again? I can't remember how you worded it. It's that people are saying like they're sick of hearing it, and I just want attention, and that
right.
it's not true. And so, what would you say to that?
This came from a grief class, so I'll just kind of back up to
Yeah.
where it came from, and from intro counseling. Intro counseling says that if you're working with somebody and you don't hear what they say the first time,
Mhm.
don't worry about taking notes, because if it's important, they'll bring it back up
Mhm.
until they feel like it's been heard. And repeating something, um, often indicates to somebody that they don't feel like they've been heard and understood. In terms of grief, it's really hard to understand why some things happen.
Yeah.
And sometimes people have to tell that story over again, not only to try to feel like others in their support system hear and understand, but also sometimes to understand themselves. They keep telling themselves until they figure out, why can't I let this go? And so that's an important step for people. When I work with people in counseling,
Mhm.
sometimes we'll go back to that same issue
Yeah.
2, 3, 4 times. And my response to them is not, we already did that, let's move on.
Right.
It's, we talked about that a couple weeks ago. I'm wondering what's bringing it up right now. Let's talk about the reason, the function of this behavior coming back up, what triggered it, and what is it that you need to feel like you can move to acceptance of what happened. You know,
Mm.
the grief process is denial, anger, bargaining, depression, and acceptance. We don't go through it linearly. You know,
Mhm. Right.
when my parent, yeah, when my parents got their diagnoses and when they died, I bounced back and forth from denial to depression to anger and back to denial again. There was the longest time
Wow.
after daddy died that I just refused to go back down there, because in my mind, daddy was still there.
Mhm.
Um, and maybe I've got daddy issues too. I don't know. But
I think we all
when
do.
when I found out that their house had been sold, that's when it suddenly hit me that,
Mm.
oh my gosh, this is actually real. And a lot of things in our life, any change can cause grief, and recognizing what it is you're grieving or what it is you need. When you keep telling somebody something, or somebody's, maybe you're going to different people, going, somebody's got to hear me at some point because I need support. I need somebody to say, I get you. I may not agree with you. I may agree with you. Doesn't matter. But I get you. And
Yeah.
I'm here to be that safety net that can hear you and help you figure out where to go from here.
Wow. That's beautifully said. I like that. What do you think about that? Living grave. Right.
And I agree with you, Maria. If you tell a story a lot of times, it loses its power over others and you. In trauma-focused cognitive behavioral therapy, which is approach that's used with children who've experienced trauma, they
Oh.
actually have to write out a narrative of what happened and then tell it to their therapist and process it. And then they have to tell it to their parents and process it. But they have to, if you've told something that's painful multiple times, you know how every time you tell it, it tends to have less emotional valence. It tends to become more academic.
Mhm.
Um, Now, the cautionary tale is, if you keep telling it just so it doesn't hurt anymore and you don't process everything that's underneath.
Mm.
But most of the time, uh, if you haven't processed it, you're going to keep having to tell it, because that um, sinkhole in
Yeah.
your heart is just going to keep emerging itself.
Oops. Right. Absolute. Don't give it power. Yes. Well, the thing I always said is like, I always say don't it takes the power out of it when I take something that has power over me and release it. And whether that means it means being authentic and sharing it or being vulnerable, like something about that is so cathartic for me. You know.
Sharing it, as well as, going back to the serenity prayer,
Yeah.
being accepting the things we cannot change and having the courage to change the things we can. Sometimes things that really suck, we just have no ability to change, and coming to that acceptance that, you know what, this can be awful right
Mhm.
now, and I can want it feels like it's taking my power, it's taking my joy, and that's okay. I can survive that.
Yeah.
I'm not going to like it, but I can survive it. And that can be really liberating, especially when you start looking back over it and you go, look at all the crap I've come through.
Yep.
Dang. I'm like Arnold Schwarzenegger mentally. Um, but so that can be another thing that can help people.
Is it hard for men to be vulnerable? Is it from society? That's a big one. That's a long one, isn't it?
Society teaches a lot of people, or taught a lot of people in my generation,
Yeah.
that men are supposed to be the strong silent type or whatever. But it's also important to remember, if you go back to the MBTI, the temperament,
Mhm.
a lot of men, like 60%, so we're not saying all of them by any means, 60% of men are thinkers. And when something goes wrong, they want to fix it. They
Yeah.
don't spend a lot of time dwelling on feelings. When I work with law enforcement, we call it the F word. All
Yeah.
right, you're not going to have to talk about the F word today. And they're all like, well, damn. Then, so it's important to recognize what someone else is doing that makes them feel vulnerable. You may not perceive as vulnerability because it's not how you communicate. And that's one of the reasons the 5 love languages became such a blockbuster,
Mhm.
was because he helped us recognize that based on how we experienced love, or the deficits that we had for some people, is how we experience love now. And for some people, it's physical touch. For some people, it's gifts. For others, it's acts of service. And each person tends to communicate they love somebody in their own love language,
Yeah.
which may fall on deaf ears. So the question is, what does vulnerability mean to you, Scooby-Doo? Um,
We love Scooby-Doo.
and how can you, in terms of increasing vulnerability, what is it that you would want to see? It's kind of like when I tell my kids, you need to clean your room. Well, their definition of clean and mine is very different. um, so saying, I want you to be more vulnerable, what does that look like to you? And they may not be comfortable using words like happy, sad, elated, whatever. But listening when they say, I was over the moon, or I was so excited, or it felt like somebody punched me in the gut. Well, that's sort of feeling words. But being aware when they are trying to share, and validating that. I really appreciate you taking that step and sharing that with me. It can go a long way, and just being open and receptive and trying to listen. If there are things you want them to do more to be more vulnerable, when they get anywhere close to it, anywhere close to it, validate that behavior. Oh my gosh, thank you so much for telling me, or it makes me feel special that you said that. Rewarding that behavior will increase the likelihood that it will happen again.
You're genius. You are.
I
Yes.
minored in behavior modification, so
I love it. Does anybody have any other questions about anything? Did I forget anything? There's other stuff I wanted to, I just can't remember. I'm so into this right now. Did I forget any questions up there? Or is there any others that you guys have before the good doctor has to?
And May is actually Mental Health Month.
Mhm.
So on my channel, I'm probably going to be doing live Q&As at least once a week. So we need to coordinate our schedules so we don't stomp on each other. But if any of y'all want to come to those, and I do it very much the same way, where it's a I guess it's a write-in, what your questions are. And I tried to provide some guidance and direction. But yeah.
Please put, oh, she,
You're so sweet, Jean.
she has helped me through a lot of the past couple of years. Really, really, really cool. And we've never met in person. It just happens to be that we made a connection on here. It's pretty cool. I put, I like that. You guys, so there's, in the video description, I have all her stuff too. And after she answered this, I'll tell you more. But he said, I'm interested to hear if there's a relationship between vulnerability and shame. At least for me, certain things I find shameful make me vulnerable and I don't reveal them. Same.
Well, I'm hearing two different questions. Number one, vulnerability and shame. If you were raised to believe that being vulnerable, not being in control was shameful, then yeah, there is a direct correlation to that. If you are not in control, then you are inadequate. And right. I'm not saying that. I'm saying that's the message you got. And then things that you find shameful make you vulnerable. Things that you find shameful, and I do a lot with porn addiction. And a lot of people struggle with shame surrounding porn addiction. And because of the shame of that behavior, they feel unlovable in some way, and they're afraid if anybody finds out, they're going to be rejected. So yeah, shameful behaviors can lead you to feeling vulnerable to rejection. Back to the whole behaviors serve a purpose and their communication, exploring what the things are that you find shameful. Where did you get that message? Who told you that? Who taught you that? And do you believe it? It's not for me to say whether it's shameful or not. That's a value judgment you've got to make in your own brain. But critically evaluating the things that we've been told over our lives that prompt guilt and shame and going, is that accurate? Do I believe that in this context at this time? Maybe 50 years ago, okay, it was a different story. Or in the Amish culture, might be a different story. But what do I believe for me in this context?
Yes. Oh, that's perfect. What else? Pete asked, what video should we start on your channel to get a grasp on what you do and what you're about?
Do you have an answer for that, Pete?
Let me see.
Or I'm sorry, not Pete, but
yes. So the thing is, okay, so she has like category, like playlist of every single, there's addiction. The addiction one is obviously the one I went straight to. And then the co-occurring disorders and things like that. But so she has stuff of like inner child that really helped me, stuff on PTSD. It was really, really helpful. It's, I don't know if there really was, I just kind of started clicking around at different things that I was interested in.
Well, and one thing I will tell you is I was going to try to put it in the chat, but I can't figure out how to do that.
I can have
if you go to DocSnipes.com /DocSnipes-AI.
Is that right?
Yes, perfect. Okay. That is my, I guess they call it a language model. I just call it my AI. And it has been educated with all 1,700 of my videos. And so you can ask it questions and it will give you an answer in text, but it also provides inline citations to exactly where in the video, in different videos that I talk about it. I find it useful. I even use it for myself. I'm like, what video was that I talked about that? But for people who are looking for answers to specific questions or who just want to start asking questions to see what they come up with, that might be a useful place to start. And then you can, obviously, like Lindsay said, I have on the front page of my YouTube channel, I do have several playlists. The one on codependency seems to be really popular too. I have another one on PTSD and CPTSD. So
Yes.
wherever.
Wow, I didn't know about the AI thing. That's so cool. That's really, really cool. And you guys, so AllCEUs is also her website where, so she trains, so CEUs continuing education. Will you explain that to them? I just had someone sign up for it yesterday. He told me.
Awesome.
I forget which one though. It was one of the addiction ones because you guys. So I'm a certified addiction counselor in Florida, and then internationally a drug addiction counselor or alcohol and drug addiction counselor. And I'm also a certified behavioral health technician in Florida. And so you have to have CEUs, I think nurses and stuff too, not just the mental health field and addiction have to, right? So you have, you have to go to an approved, here, you can explain that because I don't want to say it wrong.
Well, there are two things. I offer the pre-certification training on my website for everything. All the different certifications that are offered by most state boards. There are a few that I've missed, but definitely all the ones in Florida and Tennessee and Pennsylvania. And I think there was another, Virginia. But so I have the pre-certification training there, which is that approved training. Once you get certified, then you need a certain number of hours of training every year or 2 years, depending on your state, to maintain your license. And that's what we call continuing education. And we offer those as well. So we try to make sure that there's affordable, evidence-based, trauma-informed continuing education that's available.
You guys, that's what I use. So I have I think I have the unlimited one for the addiction, but I have to renew my license, like literally before June or whatever, but they already sent me an email and everything. And so I'm like, all right. So I have to do some CEUs, and I have access to her. So I'm going to do that. But so people ask me all the time, how did you become a certified addiction counselor? Well, it's a lot. If you don't know where to start. So this is where you guys should start if you're really interested in it. And I have a code on there for to think 10% off for LV 2024, and that's in the video description. If you sign up, and if you have any questions, you can ask her too. There's a spot on the website to ask her specific questions about the certifications. And so the thing is too, she already has it. There's certain trainings you have to have, and she has them all structured out there, and it's really helpful. And I wish, like, back in 2015 when I first got my first one, I would have done it this way, because it was a pain in the butt to try to do it otherwise, because you have to try to match them, and this is the easier way to go. Just trust me. So use my code, and you can get 10% off. And then what else did I forget with that?
The unlimited CEU membership qualifies for, gives you access to my live Wednesday webinars that I do every Wednesday at noon Eastern Standard Time. Some states require that some of your hours are live. Florida doesn't, thank God. But Tennessee does. Tennessee actually requires 80% of your hours to be live. I know, right? So if you're interested, I also recently did a live Q&A on how do I become an addiction counselor. It's on the channel. So, good. And I talk you through some of the steps on how to do it. It's really, once you recognize that you can do it, and you can become a certified addiction professional in most states without a bachelor's degree.
I need your help.
Now, to get up to a higher level where you can practice independently, you have to have a bachelor's. But in no state that I can think of, right off the top of my head, does it require a master's degree. Right. So for people who are not into going to college for a million years, addiction counseling is great. We know that the addiction epidemic is not going away, and gambling addiction is just going to get 10 times worse. They're actually talking about making the stock market tradable 24 hours a day. So it's not just crypto, but the stock market. So we're going to have a lot of people losing their life savings and developing addictions, which just breaks my heart. But then we've also got porn and everything else out there. So there's going to be plenty of demand for jobs. The Bureau of Labor Statistics says it's growing. We're supposed to add between now and 2030, 78,000 new jobs.
Wow.
And they can't fill the ones they've got right now. They're offering like insane hiring bonuses at a lot of places.
I know, it's pretty cool. Well, that's so the thing is too, so you have to get it. I always thought you had to get it in a related field. And so like, I'm almost to the end now of my bachelor's. I'm doing the capstone, which is like the end of it. But I had to go on and get the addiction studies before I could get accepted into the bachelor's. So if you guys, if she has a way to do that, please, it will save you so much time. It's taking me so many years because of all the qualifications that I needed to get in to do something appropriate. Anyways, so it's just much easier that way.
If you have questions, you can message me at support@allceus.com. Mrs. J, if you would be kind enough to put that in.
Thank you.
Then I can help kind of direct you to the right website for whatever state you happen to be in. I'm less familiar with other countries. So if you're in Canada or somewhere else, the whole continent of Africa, I'm good with, and the USA, I'm good with, as far as my knowledge of what needs to be done. But other countries, I'm a little bit, I can point you in the right direction, but I won't have any solid answers.
Well, I think this has been very necessary for me to have you on here for myself. And I hope you guys got something out of it, but I got a lot out of it. So
well, I enjoyed being here. I'd love to be back sometime if y'all want to have me back.
You have no idea. Yeah, I would have you on every day if I could. There was one last thing I wanted to say, and I forgot because that's what I do. But yes, subscribe. Video description has all of her YouTube information. And what was it? support@allceus.com?
Yes.
Here, I got it too. allceus.com. One last thing I want to say is that a lot of the reason that I will, I go with her, obviously, well, because I trust you, but, and I know you're legit, but there are so many people online that have, their fraudulence, be a counselor, schools even. And so please be careful on there. That's why, like, I'm in with her. I use her. I know it's legit. There's so many people that they will say you can be an addiction counselor and it's just these classes. You have to have something that correlates with your board. There's a whole board. It's not an easy process if you don't know, if you're trying to do it on your own, right? So you have to like try to figure out some direction here. And I don't know every state either. That's the most common question I get. And I'm like, I don't know every state and how to go about it. I could figure it out, but I know Florida, so I can help anybody with applications there too.
And what you have to do is Google addiction counseling board and then the name of your state. And that will bring up that board. And then you can start trying to sort through it and find out what needs to be done to get certified. There are a couple of states, I'm thinking Missouri might be one of them, where people have to get their training. They can't get it through me. They have to get their training through a university. But on my website, I have on the top menu bar, I have a little link for approvals, and then you can click on the map and figure out whether it's necessary in your state, whether our CEUs and trainings are accepted. We're accepted in 47 states. So beautiful. There are just a couple outliers.
Yeah. So seriously, you guys, if you are interested in doing that, please go with her. She's been the only one that I've been able to even direct people to, because there's so much out there that is just not legitimate. Do you recommend an addict go through this program as a means of recovery?
Interesting question. In Florida, for example, there's something called the Certified Peer Recovery Specialist. And we've actually had a couple of treatment centers start signing up their clients. who are in the final stages of their recovery process. They're finishing up IOP or finishing up a 90-day residential. And the CPRS training, I think, is only like 40 hours. It's not like it's clock hours. It's not super, super long. I feel it's beneficial to get the education. Now, whether you go through the training and get all the certificates where you have to pay for it, or you just watch the videos on YouTube,
right,
doesn't really matter to me. And I don't think it matters to the person who's in recovery. But I think getting some information you probably didn't hear when you were in treatment, and some slightly different perspectives on it can help you solidify your relapse prevention plan, and be more aware and understanding of what's going on in your mind as well as in your body as you're recovering.
Yes, I'm in recovery. You guys know. Well, some of you might not know. Some new people. I'm in recovery as well, and I'm in this field. And so it has helped me immensely. I am constantly learning, and I got the certifications because that's just what I decided to do. I want to have a permanent spot in this career. And so yes, Fred signed up. Yeah, he messaged me earlier about it.
Thank you, Fred. And
yes,
thank you, Jean.
Where is it? But yeah, I would personally recommend it. Just to find out. I'm always trying to find out new stuff, and I'll watch the videos on the app to just learn, because she actually knows what she's talking about. A lot of people don't.
And if nothing else, I'm kind of amusing. This is Brewster.
Hi, Brewster.
Hi to the people. Yes. Okay, get down.
So funny.
Yeah.
Awesome. All right, guys. I know Scooby. It's a hard life. I love Scooby. Oh, I love you. I'm glad you got something out of it. Thanks.
I appreciate all of you giving me your time today and attending, because I know this is not necessarily your typical or Lindsay's typical show. So I appreciate you all giving me a chance and coming. And I do answer as many support. I do answer the support tickets, all of them. And I also respond to as many comments on videos as I can. As you can imagine, with 400,000 subscribers, sometimes it can get a little bit daunting, but we do try to actually, if you take the time to write, we try to take the time to respond.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I always see you in there responding to all of them too. That's amazing. I love it. And she's coming back on. I'm declaring it now, so you have to. Thank you so much. I really.
All right, everybody. Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye, guys. Have a good one.